Hi, this is Katie from the Hopewell Branch Library. Today I'm going to read The Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces, a fairy tale collected by the Grimm brothers and retold by Philip Pullman, who wrote The Golden Compass and the other His Dark Materials books. This story also goes by the name The 12 Dancing Princesses, and I chose it today because it's always been one of my favorites. While I read, I'm going to share some illustrations from an old out-of-print edition of the story, illustrated by the artist Errol LeCain. After the story, I'll talk just a little bit about the story and give you some food for thought. So now let's get started. The Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces. There once was a king who had 12 daughters, each one more beautiful than all the rest. They slept together in one room, their beds all in a row. And every evening when they were all tucked up, the king himself locked the door and bolted it. However, when he opened the room every morning, he discovered that their shoes had been danced to shreds, and no one knew how that could possibly have happened. The princesses would say nothing about the matter. The king announced that anyone who could discover where his daughters went to dance in the night could choose one of them for his wife, and in time become king himself. On the other hand, if he failed to find out the truth after 3 nights, he would lose his own life. Soon a prince from another country arrived and offered to take on the task. He was made welcome and taken to a room next to the princess's bedroom, where he was to keep watch and see where they went to dance. A bed was made up for him, and to make the task even easier, the door to the princess's bedroom was left open. But unfortunately, the prince's eyes felt heavier and heavier as the night wore on, and he fell asleep. And when he woke up in the morning, the princess's shoes were nearly worn to pieces. The same thing happened the second night and the third, and so the prince lost his head. Many others came to try their luck at this dangerous task, but they all failed as he had done. Now it so happened that a poor soldier who had been wounded and could no longer serve in the army was making his way to that very city. On the way he met an old woman begging for alms, and feeling sorry for her, he sat down and shared his last bit of bread and cheese with her. "Where are you going, dear?" she said. "I'm not too sure, to be honest," he replied, but then went on, "Tell you what, though, I'd like to discover where those princesses go to dance their shoes to pieces. I could marry one of them then and be king myself." "That's not difficult," said the old woman. "They'll bring you a glass of wine when you go to bed, but don't drink it, whatever you do." Then she unfolded a cloak from her bundle and said, "And when you put this on, you'll become invisible, and you can follow them and find out where they go." The soldier thanked her and went on his way, thinking, "This is getting serious now." At the palace, they received him generously, showed him to his room, and gave him a splendid new suit of clothes to wear. And at bedtime, the oldest princess brought him a goblet of wine. He'd made plans for that, and he tied a sponge under his chin. He let the wine run into that and didn't let a single drop pass his lips. Presently he lay down and closed his eyes and snored a little to make them think he was asleep. The 12 princesses heard him and laughed, saying, "There's one more who's going to lose his life." They got up and opened their wardrobes and drawers and closets, trying on this dress and that one, putting up their hair, making themselves as beautiful as possible, and all the time skipping and hopping with excitement at the thought of the dancing to come. Only the youngest wasn't so sure. "You can laugh and joke," she said, "but I've got a feeling something bad is going to happen." "You're a silly goose," said the oldest princess. "You're afraid of everything. Think of all those princes who've tried to watch us, and all for nothing. I bet I didn't even need to give this soldier a sleeping draught. He'd have fallen asleep all by himself." When they were ready, the oldest princess looked at the soldier again, but he seemed to be fast asleep, so they thought it was safe. Then the oldest princess went to her bed and knocked on it. At once it sank down through the floor, and one by one the princesses climbed down into the opening. The soldier was watching secretly, and as soon as they'd all gone down, he put on the cloak and followed them. So as not to lose them, he walked so close behind them that he trod on the dress of the youngest one, and she felt it and called out, "Who's that? Who's pulling on my dress?" "Oh, don't be silly," said the oldest. "It's just caught on a nail or something." They went on down the staircase until they came to a beautiful avenue between rows of trees. The leaves on the trees shone and gleamed like moonlight because they were made of silver. And the soldier thought, "I'd better take something back as proof," and he snapped off a branch. It made such a loud crack that the youngest princess was frightened again. "Didn't you hear that? Something's wrong." "You're cuckoo," said the oldest. "They're just firing a salute to welcome us." The silver avenue changed to one where the trees were all made of gold, and finally to one where they were made of diamonds. The soldier broke off a branch from each of them, and they made such a noise that the youngest princess was frightened each time, and each time the oldest one said it was the sound of a salute. On they went until they came to a large body of water, where 12 boats were waiting, each with a prince at the oars. As the princesses arrived, the princes stood up and helped them into the boats, one each. But the soldier joined the youngest princess and her prince in theirs without their knowing. The prince said, "I don't know why the boat's so heavy today. I can hardly make it move." "I expect it's the heat," said the princess. "I'm suffocating." On the other side of the water, there stood a beautiful castle that was brilliantly lit by 1,000 lanterns. The joyful music of trumpets and kettle drums sounded clearly through the air, and the princes brought their boats to rest at the bank and helped their princesses out, and then they began to dance. The soldier danced along with them, and whenever a princess lifted a glass of wine to her lips, the soldier drank it before she could. The older ones were merely puzzled by this, but the youngest was frightened, and the oldest one had to calm her down again. They stayed there until 3 o'clock, by which time their shoes were all danced to pieces and they had to leave. The princes rowed them back across the water, and this time the soldier sat in the boat next to the oldest princess. He got out first and ran ahead, and by the time the tired princesses reached their beds again, he was already snoring in his. "We're safe," they said, and took off their lovely dresses, placed their worn-out shoes under their beds, and went to sleep. Next morning the soldier said nothing. He wanted to see that beautiful castle and the avenues of precious trees again. He went along with them the second night and then the third, and saw it all happen just as before, and each time their shoes were danced to pieces, and on the third night he brought back a goblet as more evidence. On the final morning he had to give his answer, so he took the 3 branches and the goblet and went to the king. The princesses stood behind the door to listen. The king said, "Well, you've had your 3 nights. Where did my daughters dance their shoes to pieces?" And the soldier replied, "In a castle under the ground, your majesty. They met 12 princes who rowed them across a lake." He told the whole story and showed the king the branches from the silver tree, the golden tree, and the diamond tree, and also the goblet he'd brought from the castle. The king called his daughters before him. "I expect you've heard what this man told me," he said. "Now then, was he telling the truth?" The princesses had no choice. They had to admit everything. "So you've done it," said the king to the soldier. "Now which of these daughters of mine would you like for a wife?" "Well, I'm not as young as I used to be," said the soldier. so I reckon the oldest would do me best." "You shall have her," said the king, and their wedding was celebrated the very same day. The king promised that the soldier would succeed him to the throne, and as for the princes under the ground, they were placed under a spell for as many nights as they had danced with the 12 princesses. The end. So that was the shoes that were danced to pieces, or the 12 dancing princesses. I hope you liked it. This right here is an illustration for the story by Kay Nielsen from 1920. And what I love about it, aside from the great costumes, is how the middle princess is looking right at us and smiling, kind of like she's letting us in on the joke that they're playing on their father. And that was really what I loved most about this story when I was a kid. The fact that the sisters are tricking their father every night and secretly having all this fun. But what strikes me the most reading it now is the idea that the princess's father can just lock them up in their bedroom and assume that he should be able to have total control over them. In fact, at the time that these fairy tales were first being told, girls and women, especially in the nobility, were their father's property until they got married, and then they became their husband's property. So by sneaking out at night, the princesses are essentially stealing themselves from their father. So that's pretty messed up. And as if that's bad enough, the king promises that whoever can find out what the princesses are doing at night gets to pick out one of them to marry, turning the princesses into nothing more than the king's property that he can use as a prize, which is actually exactly what princesses were at that time. And on a personal note, I do love the illustrations that I have used here, but I don't like the way that the prince looks at all, which makes it even worse. Anyways, I always wished that something different would happen at the end of the story. I wish that the soldier hadn't sold the princesses out. Maybe he wouldn't tell the truth on, just of his own choice. Or, maybe what could have happened would have been that instead of the soldier stepping on the youngest princess's gown, maybe she would accidentally step on his invisibility cloak, and it would fall off. And then once the soldier is caught and the princesses realize that he's learned their secret, they realize that they have to make a bargain with him, and maybe they could let him live in the underground kingdom as a prince. Or maybe there's some other sort of plan they could come up with that would save him from beheading, but then also allow them to keep their freedom. What do you think should have happened in the story? Do you like it just the way that it is, or is there another ending that you can imagine? Let us know in the comments what you think and what you think should have happened. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.